Hi, in this video, we're going to talk about type conversion. So we all kind of experience this, that most of the time, the calculations in Python kind of ultimately give us the result that we would expect, such as expressions like, 5 divided by 2. For human beings, when we do this calculation, we expect this to give us actually 2.5, which is what Python will give us. Now, for those of you who actually know other languages such as Java or C++, we do 5 divided by 2. At least for the first time, you'll be surprised that it gives you a 2, right, instead of 2.5. And the reason for that is because 5 and 2, they're both integers, and therefore when those languages, when it does the division, it does an integer division. So the result is 2 instead of 2.5. Again, the good thing is Python takes care of this automatically for us. And behind the scene, what it really does is it does what's called an automatic widening. And widening means going from, we're doing a conversion in which we don't lose any information, right? So going from an integer to a floating point number, we don't lose any information, right? Because we can always express an integer in terms of floating point, such as, any integer like 5, we can always express it as 5.0. So that is again, the definition of widening, where no information is lost in the process. Now, as nice as it is for Python to do this for us automatically, sometimes we actually don't really need or care for to have a float result when we're doing 5 divided by 2. Maybe having an integer result of 2, it's good enough. So if we just want an integer division result, we can do either one of the two things. One is we can do a 5 divided by 2, which give us a floating point number, and we can quote unquote convert it to an integer, right? Another is, instead of using a single slash, we can use double slashes, which is an integer division. So in this case, we are actually losing information, right? Because the actual result should be 2.5, but both of these expression would give us the number 2. So going from 2.5 to 2, we lose information, and that is called narrowing. Okay. Now, as a side, though, there's actually a bit of a really kind of subtle difference between these two ways of narrowing. Okay, and I'll illustrate that by using the Python console. So we already saw, divided by, if we do this, if we do that, we get the same result, right? The reason they're not exactly the same is what happens if we actually, one of the operand is a negative number. This gives us a -2, whereas this will give us a -3. Okay, and the reason is that when we do an int parentheses and put the result in here, this is doing a truncation. So a truncation just very simply remove everything after the decimal point. So this number is -2.5, so basically just remove the 0.5, which results in -2. However, double slash is actually what's called a floor division. So what it does is that it returns the largest integer that is smaller than the result. Now, in case of the positive 5//2, it gives us 2.5, and the largest integer smaller than 2.5, that is 2, right? So for positive 5 divided by 2, it gives us a 2. However, if it's negative 5, the result is negative 2.5, and the largest integer that is smaller than negative 2.5 is actually -3, and that's what we see here. So it's a subtle but very important difference. So we just saw explicit narrowing. Now it's also possible to do explicit widening in case it's called for. So we can convert an integer to a float. Again, that we don't lose any information in that process, but we can, and it's usually not necessary that we have to do this explicitly, but we can if we have to. Next thing, just want to point out that when we're doing int and then parentheses some number, it in other languages this might be considered a conversion, but or a type coercion. Right? We're coercing a floating point number into an integer number. Now, in Python, it's actually not quite a conversion or coercion. It's actually an instantiation. So we are actually instantiating or creating an instance of an int or integer object from this floating point number. And by the same token, we are instantiating an instance of a float object given the integer object here. And if you're not convinced by what I said, you can check the documentation on, say, for example, int, and it will tell you this actually construct an integer object. So another thing that we do quite often is that we'll convert a string into an int or vice versa. So think about it for a moment. Is this process a string, converting a string into an integer? Is it widening or is it narrowing? And what about the other way around? So it's from a string to an integer is actually narrowing in the sense that we the information that is contained in a string is not necessarily always preserved in an int when we do the conversion, right? So for example, if the string is just a string literal of 1, then yeah, obviously the information that's in the string, which is 1, is always preserved in the integer 1. However, if the information is like an ABC that is not a number, then there's no way that we can actually preserve this information in an integer. So in that sense, we're losing information, and that's why it's a narrowing. Now, when we're going the other way around, it's always possible to construct a string that represents a number, right? Or, well, either a number or either integer or a floating point. So it's always possible, and no information would be ever lost in this process. So in that sense, going from a number to a string is widening.